on the hour. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. This is the last session of the year in December as we prepare for the holidays. And already we appreciate you coming in numbers. Today we have a very important topic. For just in a few months from now, I think going backwards, in October, we met with most of you in Addis, deliberated on the issues, looked at what we were doing well, what was going wrong, and those things that we think we want to do better as we move into next year. And many thanks to you. Most of the country teams are submitting their work plans for 2020. And we would like to thank those that have already submitted and those that are actually working on bringing this. And remember, one of the taglines that we had in Addis was, funding is one of the key elements that we have. I mean, our action plans will become more tangible if they have funding tagged to it. And I think that's when most of the actions really get moving. So we are all excited of a very successful replenishment period that Global Fund went through. And this means quite a lot for most of us. And possibly, I think we all agree, I think that means continued funding for most of our key initiatives that we have so that we meet our targets. And we have two important presenters today from the Global Fund in the name of Eileen Beck. I think most of you know her, and Francesca first from the Global Fund as well. They're going to talk to us about the upcoming funding cycle for the Global Fund and what is it that is there in it for us and what we need to look out for. There are quite a lot of interesting issues that are coming through, and I invite you to sit back and pay attention to what they are having for us on offer. Let me turn it over to both Eileen and Francesca to share their screen and take us through this presentation. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you very much. Do you have my shared screen in front of you now?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning to everybody who's connecting today. My name is Franziska Fürst, and I'm here with my colleague Eileen Burke from the Resilient and Sustainable Health System team in the Global Fund Secretariat. And we will take you today through a presentation that explains the funding mechanisms of the Global Fund to fight HIV, TB, and malaria. And we will also outline what opportunities there are for laboratory strengthening, which should include also waste management. Let me quickly outline the agenda. We give you a short background to the Global Fund and how it works. We will talk about the upcoming funding cycle, and my colleague Eileen will outline which lab strengthening interventions we would like to see prioritized in the funding requests, which should of course include waste management. And then hopefully we will have some time for question and answers. So the Global Fund was founded in 2002, and it's a partnership between government, civil society, the private sector, but also of people affected by the diseases, to fight explicitly and support programs on HIV, TB, and malaria. Right now, or in the last funding cycle, the Global Fund mobilized and invested around 1 billion each year into these programs. I've added here the 4 guiding principles of our work and approach, which are partnership, country ownership, performance-based financing, and transparency. I will not go into more detail here. You have it on the slides. So our current, there was some background noise, that was not me. So our current strategy, which is from 2017 to 2022, outlines a really ambitious agenda with the objective to end the epidemics. And we have 4 objectives that guide our work, which are to maximize impact against HIV, TB, and malaria, build resilient and sustainable systems for health, protect and promote human rights and gender equality, and last, to mobilize increased resources. So laboratory strengthening falls under the second objective of building robust health systems, which are of course essential to end the epidemics, but also have a broader health benefit. This slide gives you a breakdown of the Global Fund portfolio. The Global Fund uses an allocation-based funding model to direct resources to the areas where it's most needed. As you can see, 70% of the funding goes to Sub-Saharan Africa. That is where we have the highest concentration of HIV and malaria burden. The Global Fund doesn't implement the programs itself, but instead directs the resources to local partners, and that could be Ministry of Health, community organizations, in some cases also multilateral organizations to implement the grants. So how does it work? The Global Fund raises the money, and as Nafi has mentioned, we had a very successful replenishment, which will provide us with $14 billion over the next 3 years. Countries formulate an investment case. They submit a funding request. The funding request gets reviewed and approved, and then will be implemented by the local partners in the countries. Quite important, the country investment cases have to be based on an inclusive country dialogue. And it's especially encouraged to discuss investments in the health systems and laboratory strengthening upfront and jointly across the 3 disease programs, as this, of course, addresses a cross-cutting need across all different disease programs. This approach has been systematized in the country coordinating mechanisms, which are established at country level and which include all stakeholders, government, civil society, and also affected population. So it will be quite important for you to link into that dialogue that is organized by the CCMs in the respective countries. This slide gives you an overview of the funding cycle. It shows that it's expected that national strategies, which are based on an ongoing country dialogue, form the foundation for a funding request. And that would also include a gap analysis and a needs assessment. This funding request is reviewed by an independent review panel. It goes into grant making, which basically is an agreement on the implementation arrangement and details of the grant. And after approval, there's a 3-year grant implementation period. Just to note, the application process can take up to 6-9 months. So it's quite a lengthy process. This is right now, for the next year, the funding application windows that have been announced. There is one in March, one in May, and one in August. There will be more to follow in 2021, and the dates will still be announced for that. Now, not every country has to follow the same application process. There are 5 different application processes and funding templates. The first one is a program continuation, and that is open for all well-performing programs that continue with no significant changes. So there's very little that can be brought in new. The second one is tailored for countries in transition, from Global Fund support. And the third one is especially offered to countries that have very robust and costed national strategic plans for the diseases available. And also here, obviously, the funding request is very much reliant on what is formulated in these national strategic plans. The fourth one is a full review, which of course requires a comprehensive review and gap analysis, and probably has the biggest scope in bringing in changes. The last one, tailored for focused portfolios, is especially tailored for countries with a very small investments from the Global Fund. Here, I'm pointing out a very important detail. When a funding request is submitted, it's the funding request, but also what we call PAR, the prioritized above allocation requests. And that would cover anything that is above the country's allocation. In the past, we have seen that health systems investments, including laboratory strengthening, have benefited from being registered in the prioritized above allocation request, as that would be then if reprogramming occurs and savings are being made during the grant cycle, whatever has been listed in the PAR would then be prioritized for funding. I'm pointing that out that because in the last funding cycle, over 1 billion went into the PAR allocation. This slide talks about how the quality or the content is being reviewed and how we leverage that the right quality is being reflected in the funding request. There's a technical review panel, which is independent and impartial team of experts that is appointed by the Global Fund, which is reviewing funding requests. They do have a list of TRP review criteria, and this contains also review criteria on laboratory strengthening. And my colleague Eileen will later point out what we would like to see in the next funding cycle on lab strengthening. Without going into much more detail here, this gives you an overview of what additional resources you can find on the internet. It's quite comprehensive. I'm pointing out particularly the modular framework handbook, which gives you an overview of what kind of interventions can be funded through Global Fund grants. There's also a number of e-learning courses available. Again, here is a link to where you can access them. And yeah, please make use of it. It has probably every question that you have answered on the process. I'm handing over here now to my colleague Eileen after this rather process-oriented presentation to talk about our expectations on lab strengthening. Over to you, Eileen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces on this webinar. I'm just going to briefly talk about lab strengthening. I know I'm talking to the choir, but we'll still go through it. Next slide, please. So, lab is a critical component of any health system, as you all know. All our programs depend on lab. If we have no labs, we have no diagnosis and no treatment. There will be no program. And as you know, Global Fund its main mission is to end the epidemics of HIV, TB, and malaria. So lab is critical for those programs. Next slide, please. Sorry, okay. We're making a substantial investment in lab over the last two funding cycles, directly and upstream. And from this slide, you can see where our investment has been approximately 9.2% over the 2014-2016 cycle, and 2017-2019, 11.5%. But on closer examination, you'll actually see that most of this investment has actually been on equipment and reagents, and primarily on equipment. We're seeing a huge investment here in equipment, but we shouldn't really be making, countries should not be making this investment in equipment. It should be a reagent rental arrangement. We need to build systems that'll outlive donor funding. Equipment machines are scattered all over many countries, not in use, not maintained, and no oversight of them in unoptimized lab networks. Next slide, please. We have a technical brief. It's on our website. Again, the guiding principles for investing in health laboratory systems are obviously country ownership. If we don't have country ownership, then we will have no sustainability for the future, no coordination. This country ownership should be led by, lab systems should be led by a director of lab services, not the donors who have their own interests. The lab director should be in charge of those lab systems. We'd like to see integration of lab services and systems, integration across diseases, not in silos. And obviously, we have to work in partnership. Next slide, please. So what would we like to see in the new funding cycle? What investments, what different investments would we like to see? We'd like to see less on equipment, less on outright purchases of equipment. Breaking down of these disease-specific lab silos. We are seeing in the the current funding cycle investment in parallel specimen transport networks, parallel information systems, all like as if there was a director of TB lab service, a director of HIV lab service, and a director of whatever. Lack of integration. And less on in-service training. We're investing a lot in in-service training. Lab scientists coming out of the schools should actually be trained to operate this equipment. So any investment in lab equipment should be reagent rental based on an optimized network. More investment in lab systems, in integration of lab systems, integrated specimen transport systems, integrated lab information systems, investment in lab governance and leadership structures. We're seeing weak lab leadership, weak lab TWGs, a lack of coordination. Obviously, a lab result is of no use unless it's a quality result. So we're hoping to see some investment in quality management systems in SLAMTA. And a lab cannot function without an infrastructure. Next slide, please. Sorry, yes.
Yes.
Okay, over to my colleague, Francesca.
Thank you, Eileen. And please don't forget to include considerations on laboratory waste. As you know, laboratory activities often result in a generation of hazardous waste. They could be from packaging, expired, unused, contaminated, or damaged lab reagents, spent samples, and reagent kits. In the new funding cycle, there is a special intervention area which is called Avoidance, Reduction, and Management of Healthcare Waste. It's outlined in the Modular Framework Handbook, which encourages countries to invest in this area. I'm putting up here the paragraph which makes a reference to it in the information note on resilient and sustainable health systems, which outlines very quickly what we would like to see. We would really encourage assessments on that area, on what infrastructure capacities, policies are needed in order to cater, to enable health systems to better deal with the waste. Here I put up a slide that kind of summarizes the underlying principles that we would like to see reflected in investments made in that area. And this is the waste hierarchy. So of course, it's best to prevent waste, to reduce waste, to see how much can be recycled, and at the very end, how it can be safely disposed and treated. And that is probably the case for most of the laboratory waste that is happening. So yes, this is one of the new elements in the upcoming funding cycle, so please make use of it. I'm handing over to my colleague Eileen for the key messages.
So a key take-home message really for our lab colleagues is to get organized under a national lab director.
Oops.
Lab strategic plan is of the process. Grant making, I'm afraid you're I'm sorry, I seem to have been muted there. Sorry. Let me start again. Our key message here is to get organized under national lab director, lab leader. Think systems. Use the national lab strategic plan as a basis for these funding requests that fits into your national health strategy. Be engaged in the dialogue and at all stages of the process. If you're not at the table, I'm afraid you're not going to get anything. Look for integration, no fragmentation across disease silos. If you are engaged in all of the grant making and all of the preparations, you should be able to see if there's funding for fragmented duplication of lab information systems. And always budget for waste management. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. This was from our side the presentation, and we're very happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca and Eileen, for the wonderful presentation, quite loaded with a lot of useful information. Please kindly enter your questions, comments in the chat box as we are about to move on to the question and answer session. I found this to be quite interesting, the mentioning that we've got a lot of investment coming in to the tune of about $11 billion. And it's of interest to note that I think the bulk of it went to instrumentation. And I think from the recommendations that Eileen gave, they're looking out to less and less of this sort of capital investment, but maybe looking at innovative models of getting this service, probably one that does not include, I think, outright purchases. I think we know there are quite a number of them that are coming up there, all-inclusive pricing, where things are packaged. I think leasing coming into. This is what I also picked. But then issues of integration, I think we have had similar sessions before. Integrated systems, can we not operate in silos? Can we have a systems approach? Let's look at the whole cascade. We speak from demand creation right to actually when the result is utilized. I think as resources become less and less, I think we need to be more efficient. I was happy to see quality management systems, because this really touches all of the issues that we are talking about. Infrastructure is there. Of interest is actually waste management becoming quite an intervention area. We had deep discussions in Addis, where people were actually looking out for short-term, medium-term, and long-term plans. So we hope that, I think this is an opportunity to really take and see if we can move forward. I know questions are coming in. We also have our colleagues from the civil society, colleagues from the clinicians. I would like to call upon maybe colleagues from the civil society. I think Nelson, I can see is online. What does this mean for you from the perspective of the recipients of care? Hello, anyone from the civil society? Please go ahead, Nelson. Yeah. Go ahead, Nelson.
No, I'm okay. I'm just listening.
Thank you. Eileen rounded off a bit with some key messages and talked about leadership. Really, leadership needs to take control and move forward. We have some leaders here of laboratory services online, and it will be also interesting to hear their perspective. I can see Raiva Simbi. Do you want to make any comment regarding the Global Fund processes?
Yeah, I think the leadership is important. What we learned initially is that diagnostics and labs is a little bit technical, and I think for civil society and communities, they may need to reach out to technical people from lab and programs and also clinical people so that they understand what to articulate. And we also realized that in the past, because communities and civil society were more inclined to clinicians and programming, they ended up articulating more of the program side and not much on the lab side. I think at this point, I need to share that this where we are in Kenya. I think Kenya just got his letter, and tomorrow we are having a meeting team to discuss and deliberate. And from that, we will be putting together a team to lead the Kenyan path towards this. And I hope we can get a few people who have orientation in lab and diagnostics to really work with the team in 2020 as we move on.
Thank you, Nelson. I think that's a key message, calling on the lab folks to be involved in the process. Getting back to Dr. Simbi, from your perspective as a lab leader, can you share any sentiments?
Thank you very much, Nafi. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I think Eileen raised a very good issue, which for over the past years was lacking, which is the lab leadership. And now we are happy that we have seen most countries having fully fledged directorates stationed at the head offices of the ministries of health. And I think the bottom line, what this brings is to have the lab leadership involved in the planning, working with the different programs, and also be taking control of the programs in terms of laboratory services. So I think also as we cascade downwards, even to provincial, which are regional centers, to district centers, we should also cascade the leadership of laboratories to competent lab personnel. And without that, it's very difficult now to give quality service, laboratory services. For example, the integration that we are talking about, you'd see that most of the programs, they want to spearhead the testing, but it's one machine that can do several tests. And if then it's integrated from a lab services point with good leadership, then you can actually have some savings. You can actually give a quality service, because at the end of the day, I always argue that it's one patient that we are testing, whether it's TB, it's viral load, it's drug-resistant TB, and so forth. Is this one patient that we are testing? So if we have silos, we are testing that same patient today for TB, they go home. They come tomorrow, viral load, they go home. They come with their baby, we do EID, they go home. And this can stretch up to 3 months, and where intervention could have been done in one day. So I agree totally with the presentation, and thanks very much the Global Fund team. And I hope this integration is not only on the implementation, but also from the funding cycle, where we would then integrate HIV, TB, and other comorbidities from the planning stage at the funding table. rather than at the implementation. Thank you very much, Anafi.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simbi. Key messages indeed. I know questions are coming into the chat.
Hello.
Hello. Can you?
This is Eric Opio from Kenya. Yes.
Eric.
I think the presentation is so good, and we appreciate the integration aspect. And what we need to look beyond lab services is how to sustain these activities from the global level. Because many a times we start run very well when we have fundings, but at the end of the day, when we are moving systems to Ministry of Health through the county system, like for Kenya, along the way we start.
I don't know whether it's my network,
kind of
but
drawbacks in terms of how many years to allow them to care and treatment.
Eric?
And hello?
I don't know whether it's my network, but I sort of losing you. I don't know whether it's the same with everyone.
But I'm getting it very clear.
Okay, all right. Please go ahead.
So what I'm saying, the integration is a very good approach for the lab program. We all agree as laboratorians that lab plays a critical role in the care and treatment and even overall healthcare system in any setting. So we need to look at a sustainable approach on how we are going to do integration and look at sustainability aspect for our labs.
Thank you. Thank you. I couldn't agree anymore. Thank you very much, Eric, for that as well. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Nicholas, to manage the questions from the chat. There are questions that are in the chat box right now. If you have further questions, please enter them into the chat and they will be attended to in a few minutes. Nicholas, over to you to take some questions from the chat box.
Thank you very much, moderator. The first question is from Makuni, and his talk she is saying, "This is very informative and present and interesting. Thanks to Elaine and colleagues. We are currently working on a review of our National Laboratory Strategic Plan, and this will be very helpful. Thanks again." And I think in addition to that, the presentation that has been presented will be shared with the community via mail and on the WhatsApp group, so that country teams can make reference to it in case of anything. Thank you, Makune, for the comment. The other question is from Dr. Charles, and he is saying, in countries where there is no laboratory directorate, is there anything Global Fund can do to help those countries develop a directorate of laboratory services? Once again, in countries where there is no laboratory directorate, is there anything Global Fund can do to help those countries develop a directorate of laboratory services? Yes, the Global Fund team.
Yes, I can take that one. Yes, we're aware of some countries that don't have a lab directorate or a strong lab directorate, but in some of these countries, we're actually supporting a lab technical TWG that supports that lab directorate. And there is funding in some of the grants to support the operations, the secretariat of that lab TWG. But of course, countries would have, countries would have to write that into their application.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the next question from Pam Pile. She's asking, could you please clarify how much, even in percentages, was spent on instruments versus reagents over the last funding period? Once again, could you please clarify how much, even in percentages, was spent on instruments versus reagents over the last funding period? Yes, Global Fund team.
And much of this could have been saved if there had been reagent rental arrangements and less equipment, and that money could have gone to the systems.
Thank you very much. The other question is from Nora from Zimbabwe, and she's saying, thank you, Global Fund team, for this informative presentation. With regards to the laboratory leadership structures, are there models that have been reviewed as being effective in improving quality of laboratory services? Once again, with regards to the laboratory leadership structures, are there models that have been reviewed as being effective in improving quality of laboratory services? Yes, Global Fund team.
Yes, as I said earlier, we're seeing where there are strong lab technical working groups, that they are effective in supporting a relatively weak lab directorate as such. So the strength of that lab TWG is one of the key success factors in ensuring some kind of lab leadership. It is no substitute, of course. I mean, there is structure there to support the National Lab Directorate.
Thank you very much. The other question is from Catherine, and she is saying, thanks, Elaine. I think one of the most important message is for the laboratory leadership to be engaged throughout the grant process, and this requires an integrated national laboratory health, laboratory service program that is integrated. How can countries ensure that the right people are at the table? Once again, I think one of the most important message is for laboratory leadership to be engaged throughout the grant process. And this requires an integrated national health laboratory service program that is integrated. How can countries ensure that the right people are at the table? Global Fund?
I think this is a very difficult question because it comes back again to leadership and governance at country level. And I think ASLM has a role to play in strengthening that lab leadership through lab community of practice and helping those countries. It is very difficult for Global Fund in Geneva because we don't have a country presence to ensure that the right people are at the table. Maybe this community of practice can help at that time to make sure that the lab is articulate, gets its message, gets into the table, and is able to compete for those funds.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question is from KBB, abbreviation, and his talk she is saying, with regard to laboratory equipment maintenance, can Global Fund have a role in encouraging manufacturers to create more support systems within Africa? I am thinking specifically about GeneXpert instruments. Once again, with regard to laboratory equipment maintenance, can Global Fund have a role in encouraging manufacturers to create more support systems within Africa? I am thinking specifically about GeneXpert instruments. Global Fund?
Yes, I think we have a fairly major role along with PEPFAR in this space to encourage manufacturers to have more support systems in Africa. And in fact, we have been working at global level along with some people on this call to develop a service level agreement that will be used and ensure that Cepheid in particular have a service and maintenance agent in Africa. And that's happening in multiple countries, albeit fairly slowly, but we're making progress. And we're also having expedited our expert review panel to encourage competition, because as you know, Cepheid has had a monopoly for so long, and there hasn't really been much pressure on them to improve their services. But when we have competition, I think we will see better service from Cepheid.
Hello.
Yes, Eric, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm not from Global Fund, but I want to back what Eileen is saying. Okay, competition is the best approach to improve services, but I think from the Cepheid level, they need to increase the accessibility to the facilities, because what we've seen in Kenya, at times you'll have a problem with your machines and it take like more than even 2 weeks. The service engineers are not responding to the sites. You have samples to be tested, and that in effect they affect the turnaround time. So maybe as global fast week with Cepheid, they need to look at how do they scale up their service to their specialty laboratories, and also improving effectiveness at the end of the day. Because what we are looking in terms of integration and the lab, are we able to deliver services at the right time based on service charter for the facilities? So yes, I agree with Eileen. If you go on a competitive basis
I
whereby
think,
look for
Eric,
other
if I can come back to this, I think ultimately, since you're paying approximately $1 for your service and you have a service level agreement with Cepheid, there should be, some feedback to say, to the ministry saying they're not providing this service per service level agreement, and you demand a better service from them.
Sure,
you have to show that they're not performing.
Thanks. I think we'll have to do that. We've done that because most of our labs are going through ISO 15189, and one of the things is equipment functionality is being measured during the assessments, either pre-assessment or post-assessment, and sustaining accreditation on ISO 15189.
Yeah, so if I may come in here, hello.
Yes, please introduce yourself and.
Okay, my name is Kingston Omo Emmanuel. I'm in Nigeria. So I want to support what Helen just said, that it is good to introduce some level of competition into, amongst these equipment vendors. And, we did that in Nigeria, for instance, for our viral load equipment. Before now, a greater percentage of the equipment were from Roche. But recently we had an ROFP where they undergo a competitive process and led to installation of high throughput equipment in 6 mega labs. And at the end of the day, we had 3. It was a split between Roche and Abbott, having 3. And that has led to very serious improvement in terms of the response time, in terms of making sure that those equipments are functional. Because other than saying, okay, there's competition, there's also, it's not actual procurement like Helen said earlier on. It's reagent rental or equipment lease, as you, whichever way you want to put it. And that has led to very serious improvement, because before those equipment came in, we had backlog of samples. But since after that time, these things were cleared. And when you say, oh, there's an equipment, a faulty equipment, within 24, 48 hours, they are fixed. But again, another thing that we did was to introduce key performance indicators, which is very important. And I think Ellen alluded to that too. With those key performance indicators, they are reported on a monthly basis and they are monitored. So that goes a long way in helping. And that is one of the things we have also introduced for the Cepheid now, to make sure that at the end of the day, before now, they were not strictly monitored, but now we are actually looking at them very seriously to see how things can improve. And because of the kind of agreement we now have with them, they've actually set up a service center in Abuja, Nigeria, so that we don't have that long time of taking faulty modules back to their factory, taking time to bring them back, but they can be taken care of within the country. So I feel it's something we really need to do across other countries that have not done that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kingston, Eric as well. I would like to also encourage us to kindly finish the questions in the chat. Then we can come back to this topic. I think it's a very important topic, particularly on how do we monitor our performance and efficiency of our services. Nicholas, kindly go ahead and complete the questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much, Anafi. The other question is from Edwin Ochieng, and he is asking, where do you get the full funding announcement? Where do you get the full funding announcement?
Hi, I think I can take this question. I think the allocation letters went to countries today, and that contains the full allocation to a country plus the program split between the 3 diseases. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question from Dr. Choice is, you told us to be on the table during fund sharing. However, in a number of countries, laboratories are very marginalized and not ably represented on the table. Could Global Fund ring-fence the funding for laboratories such that it is not eaten up by the bigger sub-programs like drugs and others? Once again, you told us to be on the table during fund sharing. However, in a number of countries, the laboratories are very marginalized and not ably represented on the table. Could Global Fund ring-fence the funding for laboratory services such that it is not eaten up by the bigger sub-programs like drugs and others? Global Fund?
Yes, that's a very good question. Unfortunately, we do not earmark funding for any specific activities in these programs, but
Hello? Ellen, we are losing you.
It will be obvious that have any, okay. I'll say, I'll just repeat, unfortunately, we don't have any, our model doesn't allow for earmarking in programs, but it will be obvious that if a country is going to scale up access to viral load testing and don't have any funding for viral load there for the reagents, then there obviously will be a problem. But I think that, as I said earlier, it would be very important for countries that cannot articulate their needs to have some kind of technical assistance to help countries prepare the lab part of the funding request.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question is from Dr. Gesh, and he is saying, as you know, laboratory equipment and supplies are relatively expensive in any healthcare system setting. Is there any estimated proportion of the allocated budget for the laboratory system or any special consideration for lab infrastructure and quality management? Once again, as you know, laboratory equipment and supplies are relatively expensive in any healthcare system setting. Is there any estimated proportion of the allocated budget for the laboratory system or any special consideration for laboratory infrastructure and quality management?
No, as I said earlier, there is no earmarking for lab or any part of the service delivery. But it's obvious that if you are to reach some of these targets, there has to be a proper costing done. And that's where we see some great challenges, where you may see all the budget for an equipment, but nothing for reagents. Or you might see an equipment purchase, but absolutely nothing for maintenance, for example, on the gene experts. So this really requires good lab preparation and engagement at the table with costing skills, with the right skills. Somebody alluded to earlier how to get the right people at the table. Unfortunately, in some cases, the wrong people are at the table. But the lab directorate should have that best team available and at the table that knows what they're doing and knows how a lab system works.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Eric.
I want to totally agree with Eileen. I think for lab, what we need to do is we are the users of the equipment vis-a-vis giving the services. So the specifications point of view comes from the users from the bench, from the lab point of view. So during the application, we need to make it very clear in terms of costing, what is that we need to have in our facility. If you talk about a gene expert, we need to look at the EQA aspect, we need to look at the daily IQCs, which is inbuilt in the system. We need to look at the maintenance aspect of it. So basically, I agree with what Eileen is saying. It's from us, we need to sit on a table and agree before even we submit that application to Global Fund. We look at all the costing aspect for any single test, so that when you submit this, you get the right amount you require to run a laboratory service.
Yes, absolutely. Often somebody else is speaking on behalf of lab, and it's just put together very badly with huge gaps in the funding request for lab.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Gesh, you want to make a comment? Can you make the comment? Dr. Gesh.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you for the response. Why I was asking, actually my question is almost similar to Charles, because we're really concerned that the budget allocated to countries may not go to the laboratory program. But as you know, it is very expensive, I mean, especially infrastructure. So this message, I think it is to everyone, that we have to be part of the process, the application process, and we have to advocate about the laboratory program, quality system, and all those things from the very beginning until the end. So it is really a good message to every one of us to strategize, come up with a very feasible plan and convince our national team leaders so that we can able to win or get more funding for the laboratory. I just want to highlight this one. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we are nearing the end. I don't know, Nicholas, if there are one or two more questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Okay, the other question is from, thank you, moderator. The other question is from Nelson Otoma, and he's saying, just to add that the Global Fund also has a mechanism in the CRG that supports civil society organizations and community engagement in country applications. One strategy is to ensure that a lab-oriented person joins the civil society organizations and communities when supported by the CRG. Once again, from Nelson, just add that the Global Fund has a mechanism in the CRG that supports civil society organizations and community engagement in country applications. One strategy is to ensure that a lab-oriented person joins the civil society organizations and communities when supported by the CRG. I don't know whether Global Fund wants to comment about this.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much. The other question is from Mirimo Hamomba, and his talk she is asking, I heard you mention that there are funds to support in-country technical laboratory working groups. Do all countries qualify, or there is a criteria? Once again, I heard that you mentioned that there are funds to support in-country technical laboratory working groups. Do all countries qualify, or there is a criteria? Yes, Global Fund.
All countries do qualify, but of course they have to write it into the funding application or write it into the reprogramming request. And many countries have done this.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question, the first one is a comment from Maparo, and his talk she's saying, Cepheid is really running a monopoly in TB diagnosis, yet the service delivery is poor. Is there a way to open up Cepheid competition? Once again, Cepheid is running a monopoly in TB diagnosis, yet the service delivery is poor. Is there a way to open up Cepheid competition? And then the last question will be from Dr. Collins, and he is saying, please comment on Dr. River's comment on integration at funding level and not only on implementation. once again, please comment on Dr. River's comment on the integration at funding level and not only on the implementation level. Thank you, Global Fund.
I would comment on the Cepheid question here. And indeed, Cepheid has had a monopoly in TB diagnosis for over 10 years now. But Global Fund has launched an expert review panel to open up some competition to Cepheid. And the results of that will be available probably early next year. We will see some competition to Cepheid. And there is a pipeline of new technologies coming along. So I think the days of the monopoly are coming to an end, although Cepheid technology is still quite good. The others will have to sort of catch up as well. My colleague Francesca might comment on the other question.
Please go ahead, Francesca.
Thank you. I'm not sure I could locate Dr. River's comment on the integration of funding, but yes, obviously it all starts on how the funding or the allocation is split among programs. And it has been a long discussion in the board on having also an allocation, for example, for health systems. It's a political decision and discussion that is difficult to influence with technical arguments. And for the time being, the Global Fund remains with a program split among the 3 diseases, which of course verticalizes the funding and obviously affects the implementation.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and thank you again, Aileen, for the wonderful presentations and the responses and the engagement. I think clearly this is a very important subject. I think almost all the points that we have discussed, I think, are critical, and I just can just tease out these ones. Not that they are the most important, but I think they are also key. I mean, Gesh mentioned that I think we need the right people on the table, really advocating for these. Let's approach this as a system approach. I like the comment from Nelson. He picks out that there is a civil society engagement. Can we put in technical oriented in terms of lab people in there? We are always talking about the lab clinical interface. I think there is no way the lab operates in a single silo. Whilst the issues on the funding split are being sorted out, I think clearly there are quite a number of things that we need to do. Make sure that all these requests that we have are in there. Of interest, there were quite a lot of comments around Cepheid. And I would like to just generalize that as well. I think it applies to all, I think, our service providers. Eric mentioned the issue, and Kingston, thanks for mentioning that, the issue of really bringing up these performance monitoring mechanisms with our suppliers. I think another key issue that came up was TA for lab leadership. I think we also posted an advert for a training. I think it's a long distance, and then eventually there will be some short distance in the US. I think everybody is welcome, particularly from our country teams, to really apply for that, and it can also be very worthwhile. The issues of TWGs, I think, will be very critical as we move on. We could not really finish all the questions, but we hope to continue to engage with our countries, with all of you, Aileen, Francesca. I had also a questions on incinerators. I think we can continue even on our WhatsApp group. I know the time is gone. But just a few announcements to say, I think our waste management session this month could not happen. It's towards the end of the year. But we hope to communicate soon. We usually have the first 10 days of the month, and then we have this regular one in the last 10 days of the month. So we'll be communicating with you to see what will be on offer in early January. We also call upon those that have not yet submitted their work plans. Some have communicated with tentative dates to kindly do so that we work well in time and be able to support those activities that you want to come up with. I'll hand over to my colleagues, Collins, Charles, Nicholas, to give a few 30-second remarks. Yeah, Collins.
Hello, Nafi.
Yes.
Just before you wind up, are we able to get those presentations? I'm much interested in them. And also how to join the WhatsApp link.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Please, we'll be able to get these presentations we usually share. Kindly write your number in the chat box, and we'll be able to add you to the WhatsApp group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anafi. I think it's critical what has been mentioned. That's a gap on leadership and training. And next year we will be looking at ways of strengthening leadership and for our countries so that they can sit at the table and advocate for lab issues. Otherwise, thanks, and we hope to see some of these action plans from the countries, the global fund.
Thank you. Thank you, Collins. Charles?
Okay. For me, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Short and sweet. Nicholas, you have any comment?
Just wishing everyone a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Keep safe.
All right. Last word from Aileen. Last word from Francesca.
Yes, indeed. Happy Christmas to everybody, and hope that 2020 will be a great year, and we will see very strong lab system building in all GF applications. This is our opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you. Francesca?
Yeah, indeed. I can only second on Eileen's comment here. All the best for the application process. Stay engaged and don't hesitate to contact us if you have any additional questions or you need support from the Global Fund Secretariat. Thank you very much, and also have a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you all. What's left for me is to just say happy festive season and wishing you all the best of 2020. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.